Dad was terrified of being laughed at. Every holiday, he only ever said one thing. Do not embarrass me. The relatives were sitting around chatting, when I accidentally knocked over a fruit platter on the table. He grabbed me right there and slapped me across the face. At dinner, I reached for a second helping of pot roast, and he kicked my chair out from under me. Later, when it was time to hand out gift cards, Uncle Ray miscounted and came up one short. Without a word, Dad shoved me out into the hallway in nothing but a thin shirt. The cold cut straight through me. I pounded on the door while I cried and apologized. Did not make a sound. He turned to Uncle Ray with an apologetic smile and said, "Sorry about that. I guess I have not taught this kid any manners." He did not know that. His lessons had already conditioned me to flinch at the phrase. Laughed at every time I heard it. I froze and felt myself shut down. When I heard him say it again through the closed door, I turned in silence and walked toward the dark bridge at the edge of the neighborhood. Did not know what I planned to do. I only knew I wanted the noise in my head to stop. I reached the railing and stared at the water below. One thought crossed my mind. Dad, this time, no one will ever laugh at you because of me again. The chair flipped. The back of my head cracked against the floor. Everything went dark. I lay face down motionless. Not from the impact. Getting up too fast would look fake. Dad would decide I was putting on an act. The relatives' whispers cut through the room. That poor kid over a piece of meat. Was that necessary on a holiday no less? My cousin Brady Avery grinned, reaching for more pot roast. He had it coming. He knows Uncle Phil cannot stand being laughed at. Yet he still acts out. He needed to be put in his place. I said nothing. I pushed myself up, righted the chair and sat down. Dad looked pleased, raising his voice for the table. Kids need discipline. If you do not set them straight, they embarrass you in public. The whole family looks bad. He swept a glance around. See one lesson and he behaves. Then he turned to Brady, his expression softening completely. Now Brady is sensible, never gives his dad a reason to be laughed at. Brady lifted his chin with a smug grin, leaning into a honeyed tone. Thanks to you, Uncle. I always wished I was your son. Not like some people who do not appreciate what they have, and just make you look bad. The phrase landed over and over. Laughed at, laughed at, laughed at. Each repetition triggered a tremor. It was not fear. It was the suffocating weight of Dad's obsession crushing my chest. His discipline left physical bruises, and a flinch reflex buried in my bones. His good behavior meant I was too terrified to breathe. Because of Dad's methods, the other kids avoided me. They feared their own parents might copy him. I sat in the corner, fingers gripping my hem. The guests finished eating, gathered in small groups, drinking and talking. I stayed. I had to be the son who caused no trouble. So Dad would not call me ungrateful. So the relatives would not give him another reason to feel laughed at. Brady wandered over, dropping his voice. Kellen, Avery. You are dead weight. Wherever Uncle goes, you make sure he gets laughed at. A shudder ripped through me. My fingers dug into my palm, splitting the skin. I swallowed the panic and forced my voice to stay flat. Parents did not even want you. Yet you call someone else dead weight. The color drained from Brady's face. His parents divorced when he was little. Neither kept him. Both started new families. He was raised by his grandparents. A taboo no one dared mention. He shoved me hard. You really just said that. I'm going straight to Uncle Phil. I will make sure everyone laughs at you. Go ahead. My voice was dead. My fingertips shook. There was always going to be one last blow that broke me. And someone was always going to deliver it. The relatives left. I followed Dad home. The house was suffocatingly quiet. Dad spoke. First. Does your head still hurt? I shook my head without looking up. Every movement sent blinding pain through the base of my skull. It throbbed violently. I lied. A complaint would just give him another reason to rage. Dad stared aside and walked over. My back went rigid. My fingers curled. The fear was physical faster than thought. I braced for those two words. He crouched beside me, touching the swelling on my skull. Kellen, your dad had a hard life growing up. My parents never cared for me. Then your mom passed. Before we had enough time together. His eyes reddened. I raised you alone and people talked behind my back. The entire time waiting for something to laugh at. All I wanted was to hold my head up. Just did not want to be looked down on anymore. The word hit without warning. My whole body flinched. Dad did not notice. He kept going. You are my son. If you behave and mind your manners, they will say I raised you right. Then nobody will laugh at your dad. Everything I do is for us. The phrase circled back, triggering the same spasm. My hand wanted to claw at my broken palm. But I hid it, clenching my fist to hold the shaking. Still, tears spilled anyway. Dad blinked, caught off guard. He reached out to wipe them. But I spoke first. My voice scraped raw. Brady said, I am dead weight that people laugh at you. Because of me. Dad's hand froze. Then swung hard across my face. What are you talking about? Brady is well behaved. Would never say that you were the one causing problems. Making people laugh at me. You only think of yourself. The slap rang out. My head snapped sideways. White-hot pain bleeding into the throbbing skull. My ears rang. His words faded into that endless echo. Laughed at, laughed at. Laughed at. I dug my nails into my raw palm. Pain was the only thing that muted the noise. Dad's voice shook. I worked myself to the bone so nobody had a reason to laugh at us. Was for your own good. I could not hear him anymore. The shaking would not stop. The panic response and the raw pain twisted together. Until I felt like crawling out of my own skin. Once his suffering softened me. I blamed myself, telling myself he had it hard enough. Now I saw the truth. None of this was right. If it was for my own good, why hit and humiliate me in front of everyone? If it was for my own good, why weaponize that phrase until it pushed me to the edge? I did not want that kind of good anymore. Dad finished yelling, dragged a hand down his face and stood up. His anger settling into heavy exhaustion. That is enough. Go to bed. We are visiting family tomorrow. And I do not need you giving people something to laugh about. There it was again. Walked to my room without a word. Tears hitting the floor, my fingers tracing the raw lines on my palms. I was done living like this. We went to Uncle Ray's the next day. The living room was packed. People snacked, chatted and bounced. Kids on their knees. The noise filled the house. I pressed myself into the furthest edge of the couch. Paralyzed by the singular goal of surviving without triggering Dad. Soon, Uncle Ray handed out gift cards. The room buzzed with laughter and thank yous. I stood at the back clutching my shirt. A sick feeling building in my stomach. Something bad was coming. I could feel it did. When Uncle Ray reached me. His hands were empty. He blinked, embarrassed. Kellen. I am sorry. I miscounted and came up short. I will make it up to you later. My body began to shake. Dad's face turned black. His voice cutting across the room. Kelly, Avery. Get over here. I walked over. Whispering desperately, Dad. Uncle Ray miscounted. He will give it to me later. Miscounted. Dad cut me off. Everyone else got one. What did you do to make yourself so unwelcome? You are that desperate for a gift card? Do you have any idea how that looks? You will not be happy. Until everyone is laughing at me for raising a greedy brat. Will you? The trigger tore through me. My fingers clawed at my arm. Digging until the skin tore open. Brady tugged at Dad's sleeve. His voice dripping with false innocence. Uncle Phil. I saw Kellen go through Uncle Ray's bag earlier. Maybe he already took it himself. Every pair of eyes landed on me, curious. Mocking, indicting. I was a thief caught in the act. Scraped together my last shred of strength. You are lying. I did not take anything. Dad closed the distance in a single stride. Seizing my arm directly over the freshly torn skin. Pain bored to the bone, still talking back. Still lying. You have humiliated me completely. Everyone here is laughing at me because of you. I am going to teach you a lesson. He dragged me toward the door. My feet stumbling, my arms screaming under his grip. I kept trying to explain, Dad. I did not do it. Uncle Ray miscounted. Brady made it up. I did not give anyone a reason to laugh at you. Brady saw it and you are still denying it. Dad wrenched the front door open. Letting the freezing air rush in. I will teach you a lesson. So you never forget what it feels like when people laugh at you. Through blurred vision. I saw the relatives watching and the satisfaction on Brady's face. Dad shoved me out by the shoulders into the freezing corridor. I was left in the freezing hallway. Wind howled through the gaps and cut straight down my collar. My teeth chattered so hard. My jaw ached. The pain in my arm. The throbbing at the back of my skull. And the hollow ache in my chest. Did not compare to the physical revulsion those two words triggered. The response had been carved so deep into me. That it had become part of my body. I pounded on the door and sobbed through. Apologies, Dad. I am sorry. I will not do it again. Please let me back in. I will never embarrass you again. No one will ever laugh at you because of me. Dad did not make a sound. I crumpled into a ball against the cold wall. And listened to his voice drifting out from inside. I am sorry, Ray. I have not done a good job with this kid. He is greedy and he lies. I have embarrassed everyone. Uncle Ray objected right away. The gift card was in my coat pocket the whole time. I never put it in my bag. Brady must have been mistaken. This had nothing to do with Kellen. I'd waved it off. It is fine. This is a good chance to teach him a lesson. If I do not, he will keep acting like this out there. And give people something to laugh about. Those words again. This time there was no trembling. No suffocating, no clawing at the wounds on my hands. Every response had gone quiet. All that remained was a numbness so vast it swallowed everything. I straightened up slowly. I walked out through the building. Entrance, fine. Snow drifted down outside. The neighborhood was empty. Nothing but the sound of wind. I at the dark bridge not far away. A thin layer of ice covered the river below it. A voice rose from somewhere deep inside me. Jump. Then you will never hear those words again. Jump, and no one will ever laugh at Dad because of you. I walked toward the bridge. One step at a time. Back in Uncle Ray's living room. Dad still smiled apologetically at the relatives. This punishment will help him remember. It will set an example for the other kids. You cannot act up in front of people and make your family look bad. That is how you get laughed at. Uncle Ray frowned and shook his head. This was not the kids' fault. I miscounted the gift cards. And Kelly was the one who got punished for it. Stood up. I'm going to bring him back inside. It is freezing out there. The smile on Dad's face stiffened before he caught himself. He stepped in front of Uncle Ray. No, it is fine. A little cold will not hurt him. It is a good lesson. If I do not toughen him up now, he will keep embarrassing me out there. And giving people something to laugh about. He is spoiled. Once he is cold enough, he will come around and apologize on his own. Uncle Ray's frown deepened. He looked at Dad. Listen. He is your son, your own flesh and blood. Since when is saving face more important than your child? You need to stop saying laughed at in front of him all the time. Think about what that does to a kid. Do not wait until it is too late to regret it. Something flickered across Dad's face. But his certainty did not waver. You do not understand, Ray. Everything I do is for his own good. If I am strict with him now, nobody will have reason to laugh at him when he is older. He will understand. When he grows up, he will appreciate what I did. His eyes still shone with the self-satisfied conviction of a father who believed he was doing right by his son. He had no idea that the words he tossed around so carelessly had already become a trigger, seared into my bones. The final weight on a scale that had been tipping for years. He would never know that the pride he valued more than anything had driven his son away. Uncle Ray opened his mouth to speak. But Brady burst through the front door before he could say anything. The boy's face was white as paper and his voice cracked and shook. Uncle Phil, Uncle Ray. Something happened. Kellen, he jumped off the bridge by the neighborhood. The words hung in the warm, festive air of Uncle Ray's living room like a sudden, localized frost. Brady stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his boots covered in slush. His face, usually twisted into a self-satisfied smirk, was entirely devoid of color. The smugness that had defined him just moments before had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked terror. For a long, agonizing second, no one moved. The chatter of the distant relatives in the kitchen died down in waves, like a radio being slowly turned off, until the only sound in the house was the hum of the refrigerator and the heavy, ragged breathing of a frightened boy. Uncle Phil did not move. His hands, still poised in a gesture of defensive explanation, remained frozen in midair. The self-satisfied smile on his face did not fall so much as it withered, turning into a grotesque, rigid mask. His mind, always calculating how he appeared to the world, seemed to short-circuit. What did you say? Phil's voice was barely a whisper, thin and reedy. Kellen. Brady choked, pointing a trembling, wet hand back toward the open door. The bridge. I saw him. He didn't even hesitate, Uncle Phil. He just walked up to the railing and he went over. I tried to yell, but he's in the river. Uncle Ray was the first to break the paralysis. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at Phil. With a low, guttural curse, Ray threw open the closet door, grabbed a heavy wool blanket, and bolted out into the freezing night, leaving the front door wide open. The winter wind rushed into the house, instantly extinguishing the warmth of the living room. Phil stood frozen for another 3 seconds. His eyes darted around the room, catching the horrified, accusing stares of his relatives. Aunt Sarah had her hand over her mouth. Uncle Greg was already reaching for his phone, dialing 911. With shaking fingers. The social armor Phil had spent a lifetime constructing was cracking in real time, right in front of the very people he had sacrificed. His son's dignity to impress. It's an act, Phil muttered, though his voice lacked any conviction. He took a step toward the door, his boots slipping on the hardwood. He's just trying to get attention. He wants to make me look bad. He wouldn't. Shut up, Phil. Aunt Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with a mix of fury and panic. Get out there. Go. Phil flinched as if he had been struck. The realization that his family was looking at him not with respect, but with absolute disgust, finally pierced his denial. He turned and ran out into the snow, his dress shoes sliding useless to the icy pavement. The run to the bridge was a nightmare of cold and dark. The snow was falling. Thicker now, large, wet flakes that stung the eyes and blurred the world into a hazy gray. Ray was ahead, his heavy boots crunching violently against the snow. He reached the edge of the neighborhood where the concrete sidewalk gave way to the rusted iron railing of the old bridge. Beneath it, the river ran black and sluggish, choked with jagged sheets of white ice. Kellen. Ray's voice boomed across the empty valley, cracked with desperation. Kellen. Phil caught up, gasping for breath, his chest burning from the unaccustomed exertion. He gripped the cold iron railing, looking down into the dark water. The ice near the center of the river was broken, a jagged black hole staring back up at the sky like an empty eye socket. There. Ray pointed. A pale shape was caught against a fallen willow branch about 50 yards downstream, bobbing gently in the freezing current. It was Kellen's thin shirt, ballooning in the dark water like a discarded plastic bag. He wasn't moving. Oh God, Phil whispered. The weight of the moment finally crushed his ego. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about what the neighbors would say. He was looking at his only son, face down in an icy grave, because of a handful of gift cards and a lifetime of cruelty. Kellen, no, no, no. Ray didn't hesitate. He slid down the steep, snow-covered embankment, tearing his jeans on the frozen brambles, and plunged into the knee-deep mud at the river's edge. The water was paralyzingly cold, but he pushed through, breaking the thin ice with his forearms as he lunged toward the willow branch. Help me. Ray roared back at the bank. Phil. Get down here. Grab his arms. Phil scrambled down the bank, falling twice, his expensive wool coat caked in gray mud. He dragged himself into the freezing water, the cold hitting his chest like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Together, the two men hauled Kellen's limp, heavy body out of the river's grip and onto the snowy bank. Kellen was blue. His lips were a bruised purple, his eyes closed, his skin translucent and cold as the ice they had just pulled him from. His fingers were still curled into tight, rigid claws, the raw, self-inflicted scratches on his palms standing out in stark, bloody contrast against his pale skin. Ray immediately began chest compressions, his hands locked together, pressing down with a rhythmic, desperate force. Come on, kid. Come on, Kellen. Don't do this. Don't let him win. Come on. Phil knelt in the snow, his hands hovering over his son's body, trembling so violently he couldn't touch him. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of Ray's heavy breathing and the sickening, wet thud of chest compressions. Then, in the distance, the wail of sirens began to echo through the valley. The waiting room of the county hospital smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was 3 a.m. The Avery family sat in scattered clusters, the festive holiday clothes they still wore looking absurd and gaudy under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. No one spoke. The silence was thick, pregnant with an unspoken condemnation that focused entirely on one corner of the room. Phil sat alone on a vinyl chair, his wet clothes having been replaced by a pair of oversized, green hospital scrubs given to him by a sympathetic nurse. He was shivering, but not from the cold. His head was buried in his hands. Every time the double doors to the emergency wing swung open, he flinched, expecting the worst. But more than the fear of death, an insidious, familiar poison was still working its way through his mind. He could feel the eyes of his relatives on him. He could hear the faint, murmured conversations of Uncle Greg and Aunt Sarah across the room. How could he do that to his own son? Over a gift card, did you see the kid's hands? He'd been clawing at himself. Phil's chest tightened. They were judging him. They were blaming him. The thought made him want to stand up and scream, to explain that he was the victim. Here, that he had only tried to raise a disciplined boy, that Kellen was unstable, that it wasn't his fault. But the words lodged in his throat. Even he knew how monstrous that would sound out loud. The heavy doors pushed open, and a doctor in blue scrubs walked out, looking exhausted. His name tag read at.Every. He held a clipboard, his expression grave and unreadable. Phil scrambled to his feet, his slippers squeaking on the linoleum. Doctor? He is my son. Ray was on his feet instantly as well, stepping up right beside Phil, his shoulder subtly blocking Phil from dominating the space. at.Every looked at both of them, his gaze lingering on Phil's disheveled appearance before settling on the clipboard. We managed to restore a stable heart rhythm. His core temperature was dangerously low, severe hypothermia, but the cold water actually slowed his metabolic rate, which may have protected his brain from prolonged oxygen deprivation. He's on a ventilator in the ICU right now. Phil let out a long, ragged breath, his shoulders sagging. Thank God. Thank God. He's going to be okay. I didn't say that, at.Every interrupted, his voice cool and clinical. He is in a medically induced coma to allow his body to recover from the trauma. The next 48 hours are critical. We won't know the extent of any neurological damage until we attempt to bring him out of it. The doctor paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at Phil. There are other concerns. During the examination, we noted several physical injuries that do not appear to be related to the fall or the water. Phil's heart skipped a beat. His throat went completely dry. What kind of injuries? He has severe swelling and hematoma at the base of his skull, consistent with blunt force trauma. He has a laceration on his left cheek, and deep, self-inflicted gouge marks on his forearms and palms. Some of these injuries are fresh, others show signs of older, healed scarring. at.Every paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The hospital is legally mandated to report suspected cases of physical abuse to Child Protective Services and local law enforcement. A social worker has already been notified and is on her way. Phil felt the room spin. The floor seemed to tilt beneath his feet. CPS. Law enforcement. Abuse. No, you don't understand, Phil stammered, his voice rising in panic. He could feel the entire waiting room locking their eyes on him. He fell. At the dinner table, his chair slipped. He hit his head on the floor. It was an accident. And the scratches, he's always been an anxious kid, he does that to himself. I would never. Save it, Phil, Ray said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. Ray, please, you have to tell them, Phil pleaded, turning to his brother-in-law, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic urge to save himself. You saw him fall. You heard the chair. Tell the doctor it was an accident. If they start investigating, what will people think? The neighbors, the church. They'll think I'm a monster. Ray looked at Phil for a long, quiet moment. The disgust in his eyes was so absolute that Phil actually stepped back. You are a monster, Phil, Ray said softly. And I'm not telling them a damn thing except the truth. By morning, the police had arrived at the hospital. Detective Marcus Vance was a man who had spent 20 years looking at the worst things human beings could do to one another. He sat in a small, private consultation room opposite Phil, a cup of untouched black coffee sitting between them. Let's go over the sequence of events again, Mr. Avery, Vance said, his tone deceptively conversational. He was flipping through a notebook. Your nephew, Brady, claimed he saw Kellen take a gift card from his uncle's bag. Is that correct? Yes, Phil said quickly, his voice hoarse. Brady saw it. He told me. I was embarrassed. We were guests in Ray's house. I wanted to teach him a lesson about honesty. And how did you teach him that lesson? I put him outside. Just for a few minutes. To cool off. To think about what he'd done. In a thin shirt. In sub-zero temperatures. After you had already physically assaulted him at the dinner table, Vance stated flatly, not looking up from his notes. I didn't assault him. Phil protested, his face flushing red. He was being disrespectful. He was reaching across the table, acting like a glutton, making us look like we have no manners. I pulled his chair. It was a disciplinary measure. I didn't think he'd fall like that. And the slap to the face? The one the other relatives witnessed? Phil's hands shook. It was a reflex. A father's correction. You don't understand how hard it is to raise a boy alone. People are always watching. They're always waiting for you to fail, to point and to judge. He stopped himself before he could say the words laugh at me. Detective Vance leaned back, his chair creaking. Let's talk about Brady. We spoke to him about an hour ago. He was pretty shaken up. When we asked him about the gift card, he broke down. Do you know what he told us, Phil? Phil stared at the detective, a sickening dread pooling in his stomach. He told us he lied, Vance said. He said he hated Kellen. He said Kellen was always quiet, always weird, and that he wanted to see him get in trouble. He knew exactly how you'd react. He knew that if he told you Kellen made you look bad, you'd blow up. Brady admitted he threw the gift card into Ray's coat pocket when no one was looking, then made up the story about Kellen stealing it. Phil sat frozen. The world around him seemed to crumble into dust. Brady had lied. The entire justification for his anger, the driving force behind his righteous fury that had pushed his son out into the freezing cold, was a fabrication by a jealous child. He lied? Phil whispered. Yes, Vance said, his eyes cold as flint. But Brady didn't throw your son over that bridge, Phil. You did. You built the cage he was trying to run away from. Your brother-in-law, Ray, told us about the phrase you used. The one you kept repeating. Laughed at. Phil felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. I just wanted him to be respectable. I wanted us to be respected. There's a difference between wanting respect and torturing a child to feed your own ego, Vance said, standing up. He closed his notebook with a sharp snap. The district attorney is already reviewing the file. We're looking at felony, child abuse, reckless endangerment, and depending on how that boy in the ICU does over the next 24 hours, we might be looking at manslaughter. Vance walked to the door, then paused, looking back at the broken man sitting in the green scrubs. You wanted to make sure nobody laughed at you, Phil. Well, congratulations. Nobody's laughing. They're just disgusted. 2 days passed. The news of the incident spread through the small, tightly knit neighborhood like wildfire. In a suburban town where appearances were everything, gossip was the primary currency. The very nightmare Phil had spent his entire adult life trying to avoid was unfolding in the most public, humiliating way possible. The local newspaper ran a small but prominent piece on the front page of the Metro section, local father arrested in connection with teen suicide attempt. The article detailed the freezing temperatures, the allegations of physical abuse, and the pending charges. Phil's phone buzzed constantly with text messages, not of support, but of formal withdrawals. The elder board of his church sent a polite, terse email stating that his services as a lay minister were no longer required and that it would be best for the congregation if he refrained from attending services during this difficult time. His neighbors, the ones he had spent years trying to impress with his perfectly manicured lawn and his clean car, actively turned their heads away when they saw his vehicle pull into the driveway. Phil sat in his dark living room, the house suffocatingly quiet. He hadn't turned the lights on all day. He stared at the empty walls, the framed photographs of Kellen as a young boy looking back at him with hollow, frozen smiles. For the first time, Phil was forced to look into the mirror without the shield of his pride. He had thought he was protecting his family. He had genuinely believed that by being harsh, by forcing Kellen into a mold of quiet, invisible perfection, he was saving them both from the cruelty of the world. They will say I raised you right. Then nobody will laugh at your dad. The words echoed in his own mind, sounding hollow, pathetic, and deeply sick. He had weaponized his own trauma, the shame of his own neglected childhood, and poured it into his son's veins like poison. He had taught Kellen that his very existence was a liability, a mistake waiting to be ridiculed. The phone rang. It was Ray. Phil answered it on the first ring, his voice trembling. Ray? Is Kellen. He's waking up, Ray said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. The doctors are reducing the sedation. They're going to extubate him in an hour. I'm coming, Phil said, scrambling for his keys. I'll be right there. No, you're not, Ray interrupted sharply. There's a temporary restraining order in place, Phil. The social worker filed it yesterday. If you come within 100 yards of the pediatric ICU, security will have you arrested on site. I'm only calling because he's my nephew, and I thought you should know he's alive. But do not come here. The line went dead. Phil stood in the dark hallway, the keys clutched in his hand, his knuckles white. The rejection was absolute. He had lost his son, his family, his reputation, and his freedom. The very thing he had fought so brutally to protect, his image, was gone forever, shattered by his own hands. In the intensive care unit, the world returned to Kellen in fragments of light and sound. First came the smell, sharp, chemical, and clean. Then came the sound, a steady, rhythmic beep, beep, beep. That seemed to coordinate with the throbbing pain at the back of his head. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt as though they had been glued shut. His throat was dry and scraped raw, burning with every breath. When he tried to move his hand, a sharp, localized pain flared in his arm. Easy, Kellen. Easy, buddy. Don't try to move just yet. The voice was soft, warm, and unfamiliar in its gentleness. It wasn't the harsh, barking tone of his father. It wasn't the mocking, high-pitched tease of Brady. It was Uncle Ray. Kellen slowly blinked his eyes open, squinting against the harsh light. The room slowly resolved into focus. He was in a hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and tubes. Uncle Ray was sitting in a chair beside him, his face lined with exhaustion, his eyes red-rimmed but filled with a profound, quiet relief. Ray. Kellen tried to speak, but his voice was nothing more than a dry, raspy wheeze. Don't talk, kiddo. Here, let me get you some water. Ray reached for a cup with a straw, gently holding it to Kellen's cracked lips. The cool water was the most incredible thing Kellen had ever tasted, soothing the fire in his throat. He sank back into the pillows, his mind slowly piecing together the fragments of his memory. The gift cards. The cold. The door shutting. The dark bridge. The black water. Jump. Then you will never hear those words again. Kellen's chest suddenly tightened, a wave of familiar panic washing over him. His breathing grew shallow, the monitor beside him beginning to beep at a frantic pace. He looked around the room wildly, his eyes darting to the door. Where is he? Kellen gasped, his hands clenching into the sheets. Is Dad, is he going to? He's not here, Kellen, Ray said quickly, leaning forward and gently placing a hand over Kellen's trembling fingers. He was careful not to touch the bandages, wrapping his palms. He's not allowed here. He's never going to hurt you again. I promise you. Kellen stared at his uncle, his eyes wide with disbelief. But I made him look bad. I jumped. Everyone must be laughing at him now. He'll be so angry. He'll let them laugh, Ray said, his voice firm and steady, cutting through the panic. Let them say whatever they want. It doesn't matter anymore, Kellen. What he did to you was wrong. It was abuse. The police know. The doctors know. None of this was your fault. Kellen's breath hitched. For years, his father's reality had been the only reality he knew. He had believed that his pain was a necessary sacrifice to keep the peace, that his bruises were the price of his dad's dignity. To hear someone else, an adult, a respected member of the family, flatly call it abuse felt like a seismic shift in the earth beneath him. He said it was for my own good, Kellen whispered, a tear escaping his eye and sliding down his pale cheek. It wasn't, Ray said, his own voice cracking with emotion. He squeezed Kellen's hand gently. It was for his own pride. And a father's pride isn't worth a single hair on his son's head. You're safe now, Kellen. I'm going to make sure of it. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Kellen felt the tight, suffocating knot in his chest loosen just a fraction. He looked down at his bandaged hands, the physical evidence of his pain, and let out a long, shuddering sob. He cried for the cold hallway, for the slaps, for the fear, and for the boy who had believed that the only way to find peace was to disappear into the Black River. Ray didn't try to stop him. He just held his hand and let him cry. The trial of Phil Avery did not draw national headlines, but to the local community, it was the event of the year. The courtroom was packed every day. Phil sat at the defense table, wearing a dark suit that now hung loosely on his diminished frame. He had lost weight, his face hollowed out, his eyes sunken and surrounded by dark circles. He looked 10 years older. The prosecution was ruthless. They called the relatives who had been present at the holiday dinners. They called Uncle Ray, who testified with a quiet, devastating anger about the years of emotional suppression he had witnessed. They called the medical examiner, who presented high-resolution photographs of Kellen's injuries, the deep bruising on his skull, the defensive wounds, and the self-inflicted gouges on his arms. But the most damaging testimony came from the school psychologist, who had kept records of Kellen's severe anxiety and his physical flinch response to loud noises or specific phrases. Throughout it all, Phil sat in silence. He had been advised by his lawyer not to speak, but the truth was, he had nothing left to say. The defense tried to paint him as a struggling, grieving widower who had done his best under difficult circumstances, a father who had simply been too strict. But the argument felt hollow in the face of the medical evidence and the testimony of his own family. When the jury returned with the verdict after only 3 hours of deliberation, there was no surprise. Guilty of felony child abuse. Guilty of reckless endangerment. The judge, a stern woman named Evelyn Vance, looked down at Phil with a expression of profound distaste before delivering her sentence. Mr. Avery, Judge Vance said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. You spent your entire life terrified of public humiliation. You tortured your son, broke his spirit, and nearly drove him to his death, all to protect a fragile, superficial image of respectability. In your pursuit of saving face, you lost your humanity. The irony is that the very thing you feared most, being looked down upon, being judged, being a failure in the eyes of the world, is now your permanent reality. You are not a respected father. You are a convicted felon. She sentenced him to 7 years in a state penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for the first 4. As the bailiff stepped forward to cuff him, Phil turned his head toward the gallery. He was looking for a friendly face, a single person who looked at him with sympathy or understanding. But there was no one. His neighbors looked away. His former friends from the church stared at the floor. And in the second row, sitting beside Uncle Ray, was Kellen. Kellen was wearing a clean, simple sweater. His hair was cut neatly, his skin had regained its healthy color, and his hands, though still scarred, were no longer shaking. He looked at his father not with anger, not with fear, and certainly not with the desperate urge to apologize that had defined his childhood. He looked at him with nothing but a quiet, detached pity. In that moment, Phil realized the ultimate truth of his failure. He had wanted Kellen to fear him, to respect him, to be a reflection of his own ego. Instead, he had become completely insignificant to his son. The cuffs clicked shut around Phil's wrists, and he was led out of the courtroom, his head bowed, the heavy doors closing behind him. The spring of the following year was unusually warm. Uncle Ray's house sat on a quiet hill overlooking the valley, far away from the neighborhood of Phil's old home. The garden was beginning to bloom, patches of yellow daffodils and purple crocuses pushing their way through the damp, fertile earth. Kellen sat on the back porch, a notebook in his lap. He was 16 now, his shoulders broader, his posture relaxed. He was no longer the shadow of a boy who tried to disappear into the corners of rooms. From inside the house, the sound of laughter drifted out. Ray was cooking dinner, arguing good-naturedly with Aunt Sarah about the proper way to season a roast. It was a warm, chaotic, and completely unscripted sound. For the first few months after the hospital, Kellen had still flinched. Every time a door slammed, every time someone raised their voice in excitement, his body would go rigid, his fingers clawing at his palms in a phantom reflex of self-preservation. But therapy had helped. Ray's steady, unconditional presence had helped even more. Kellen had learned that a home didn't have to be a minefield. He had learned that mistakes, like dropping a plate or miscounting a gift card, were just mistakes, not crimes deserving of violence. The phrase laughed at still held a certain echo in his mind, but it was no longer a trigger that could pull him to the edge of a bridge. It was just a collection of letters, a string of sounds that had lost their power to hurt him. Kellen. Dinner's ready. Ray called out from the screen door, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. Kellen closed his notebook and stood up. He looked out over the yard, toward the distant hills where the river ran quiet and peaceful under the spring sun. The dark water was gone, melted away by the warmth of a new season. Coming, Uncle Ray, Kellen said. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him, leaving the cold and the silence of the past completely in the dark.